Hey guys, Timothy here. I'm back with another standard deck tech video. This one is actually just really fun. I played it at an F&M and put this deck together kind of on the fly. I was visiting family and I had to make a deck out of kind of the tools that were available. And we went ahead and tossed together a bunch of cards to make a Temur Assault Formation deck. Now, as I'll mention later in the video, there are a bunch of ways to abuse Assault Formation in Standard right now. It's a card that's, I think, has been completely overlooked in the competitive scene, but as you'll see, this deck can do some absolutely insane things. It is Temur color, so we're going to be running red, green, and blue, another 3-color deck. I'm going to go ahead and just start off by telling you why you should be playing this deck. First off, it's insanely fun. Assault Formation is one of those cards that completely flips around the rules of Magic. You're sitting here playing a bunch of defenders, and then suddenly you drop this enchantment, and now you are swinging for absurdly huge amounts of damage. You can do this very early in the game. One of the things I really like about Assault Formation decks in general is that you have a built-in defense in your deck. You're very good in game one against a certain type of decks like aggro decks or decks that are relying on cards like board sweepers, small board sweepers to keep the field clear. Of course, your deck is going to get a little bit worse after Sideboard, and because the enchantment removal will come in. But you usually have this very solid game plan game one, and you're able to steal a lot of games just because decks aren't prepared for it. Like I said, you have some very explosive early game draws. The fact that Assault Formation only costs 2 means it can come down really early, and just you can start slamming the creatures that you've been playing the turn you play Assault Formation. Of course, the downside to that is that your deck doesn't do very much without Assault Formation. So you are kind of relying on this one card, and there are going to be those games where you never draw it or it gets wiped as soon as you play it. So you have to have a backup plan, and thankfully there are a couple built-in backup plans here too. And finally, this is a very budget deck. You can build the deck very cheaply. Most of the creature base you can probably pick up from your local game store in like a commons box or something like that. It's just compiled of cards that people aren't really using right now for the most part, so you can put together the deck very nicely. Unfortunately, some of the key cards like Assault Formation, and you'll see Collected Company again, they're rotating during the next rotation, so this deck isn't going to be around forever. I suggest you start playing it now, and in fact, that's not even the suggestion, it's a demand. Please start playing Assault Formation. It's absolutely insane. But as always, we're going to start with the deck list, and here I've kind of laid out everything that's in the deck. This time I put the creatures on the left and I put the non-creature spells on the right, just to kind of give you an idea of what the curve looks like for both of those types of spells. So starting in the 1-drop slot, the only thing we can play on turn 1 is Sidici's Faithful, and honestly you usually won't play it on turn 1 unless you have Assault Formation in your hand. It kind of serves 2 purposes. First off, if you draw it alongside Assault Formation, you can actually start swinging for 4 damage on turn 2 if you play the Faithful on turn 1 and then follow up with the Formation. Unfortunately, you'll see we're playing a lot of tap lands, so it's not very often you'll do this, but it is a possibility. Sidici's Faithful also kind of covers a bit of the removal that we're lacking. And I'll go into more detail on some of these cards in a later slide, so I'll just run through the deck list real quick. Sidici's Faithful is a 3-of. In the 2-drop slot, we've got 4-of Tide Drifter and Kozilek Sentinel. And then the 3-drop slot is pretty heavy. We've got 4-ofs of Vile Aggregate and Benthic Infiltrator, 3 Void Grafters, and a single Herald of Kozilek. I'll explain kind of the mix-up between those multicolor cards a little later. There's a single Gold Knight Castigator. The only card that's been added since Shadows of Innistrad to the creature base is Gold Knight Castigator, and it is absolutely insane in the deck. Of course, our deck relies on Assault Formation, so there are 4 of those. We've got 2 Anticipations, 3 main deck Radiant Flames is really nice, and then of course Collected Company. Maybe my next deck tech video will be something that doesn't involve abusing Collected Company, but can you really blame me? The card is absolutely insane. It is by far the best card in Standard. I will argue that point with anything. It's better than Jace. It's better than literally any other card I can think of in Standard right now. So I kind of tempted to play decks that have Collected Company for good reason. Looking at the mana base, this has been a work in progress, but what I've got here has been very consistent, and I've found I have almost no games at all where I'm just missing a color or unable to play my spells. There's 2 of each basic land, Mountain, Island, and Forest, 4 of each of the mana lands, and I'll go ahead and take a second here to just point out how great Wandering Fumarole is in this deck alongside Assault Formation. The fact that if you have the enchantment on the battlefield, you can activate Wandering Fumarole and then effectively have it as a 4/4 is really awesome. It puts it leaps and bounds above Lumber and Falls, and it lets you actually just eat up certain games, lets you win with your man lands sometimes, which is insane. Moving on from that, we have Cinderglade and Game Trail as a 2 of each. I haven't had too much experience playing with these new hand lands or shadow lands or whatever you want to call them. So the split between those and basics and these dual lands from the battle lands from Battle for Zendikar and Oath, I don't really know what the split should be yet, so suggestions welcome there. But I like the 2/2. It's worked out pretty nicely. At the very least, they're just mana fixing in green-red, even if they come down tapped. 3 Evolving Wilds is kind of my standard for 3-color decks right now. I don't want to go the full 4 unless I have a reason to get a land in my graveyard, and I don't want to skimp too much because it does fix for all our colors. And then finally, there's a 1 of both Yavimaya Coast and Shivan Reef. These really just serve as mana fixing for blue, while at the same time giving us additional untapped sources. So as you can see, we only have 8 sources that come in untapped, with the exception of Cinderglade and Game Trail sometimes being additional sources that will come in untapped. But we are playing a lot of tapped sources between the 8 man lands and the 3 Evolving Wilds, and occasionally the other lands here. So our deck is not super slow. Thankfully, our curve is low, which kind of lets us get away with all these tap lands. But it does make some of the more busted draws a little bit more unrealistic. All right, time to talk about the card choices. And, of course, it's very fitting to talk about the namesake card here, Assault Formation. This is one of those cards, when you play it, and this has happened in nearly every game I've played Assault Formation, and I've been playing this card in various decks ever since it's been printed. I just love it that much. But it's one of those cards when you play it, your opponent actually has to stop and reread the card. People have a vague understanding of what it does, but people dismiss this card so much that they don't actually know what it does. And a lot of people forget about that last ability. Of course, the ability to assign combat damage based on toughness is just broken with certain draws. You go Sidisi's Faithful or Tide Drifter into Assault Formation, you're swinging for huge amounts of damage. The second ability lets our defenders attack, but you'll notice in the main board there actually aren't any creatures with defenders, so we don't have to waste extra mana letting them attack. That final ability is actually very crucial. Not only is it an anthem for our creatures, since it's raising our toughness, it's increasing the amount of damage, but we can also use it to kind of push ourselves out of range of certain board wipes. Languish and Chandra -4 are cards that might be able to get us, as well as Kozilek's Return on the buyback for casting an Eldrazi. That can deal 5 damage to everything, and if we have open mana, we can kind of leverage our Assault Formation to push our creatures out of range. The last ability is actually really key in winning a lot of games. It lets you push in lots of damage unexpectedly. Assault Formation just does so much, and like I said, your deck relies on it. There are ways to win without it, but you're going to want to dig for it as much as possible. And the games where you have it in your opening hand are night and day to the games where you struggle to find it. I suggest playing the deck and figuring it out for yourselves. The last thing I'll say about Assault Formation is that it's actually pretty brutal to draw multiple copies because the extra copies don't do anything in addition to the first one. If your opponent's packing enchantment hate, then it's pretty nice to drop a couple copies. That way you have reassurance from their enchantment hate. But other than that, there aren't too many ways to take advantage of having the second copy. So it's kind of whatever you want to call it, a necessary evil that you're going to draw multiples sometimes and have these extra dead cards in your deck. Moving on, we'll look at the removal spells. I spoke about Sidisi's Faithful a little while ago. It is our only 1 mana card in the entire deck. It gets us out of some certain situations. There are cards that are hard for us to deal with, mainly like huge flyers and stuff, and Sidisi's Faithful gives us an out to that. It's also just our turn 1 play if we have the Assault Formation in hand. It lets us do large amounts of damage really early in the game, and a lot of decks in the format right now aren't prepared to start taking 4 as early as turn 2. Radiant Flames is really nice that we get to mainboard this, especially with all these human decks floating around, and in particular, I'm recording this out, during the weekend of the Pro Tour for Shadows over Innistrad, and it seems that there's this big sacrifice deck that's made waves, and Radiant Flames can really help leverage our game plan against that. Radiant Flames is also really, really nice because it actually doesn't kill any of the creatures in our deck, and we can reliably tap it for 3 colors. So I love Radiant Flames being in the main board. There's an additional one in the sideboard. We didn't want to play the full 4 copies, mostly for Collected Company, maximizing the creature count here. But having these main board helps us win a lot of games that we might otherwise struggle with. Looking at the 2 drops here, we have what I would consider the worst card in the deck alongside the best card in the deck. Kozilek Sentinel is the least impactful card that we're running. The ability doesn't really matter, especially if we have the Assault Formation, even though it lets us peck in a little bit of damage early. And while I say Kozilek Sentinel is the worst card in the deck, or the least impactful card, it still fits the deck nicely. It fits a role, gives us another 4 toughness creature, which essentially turns into a 4 power creature alongside our enchantment. So I don't mind running the full playset of this. It is possible I would cut one of these at a more casual event for an additional Void Grafter, but I'm fine running 4 copies in a more competitive scene. Tide Drifter, on the other hand, is what I consider the best card in the deck, and I'm not actually, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Well, besides Collected Company, it's the best card in the deck. It pumps all of our creatures, so it's an Anthem on a 2-drop, which is crazy. It has 5 toughness to start with, so it's got the biggest toughness of anything we can play really, really early. Lets us bash in really large amounts of damage if we go turn 3 Assault Formation after playing a Tide Drifter. And just like I said for Assault Formation, that extra toughness can put us out of range of cards like Languish. You'll notice when we're looking through our creature base, nearly all of our creatures are 4 or 5 toughness creatures. So if our opponent has things like Roast, Languish, Chandra's -4, things of that nature, Tide Drifter really helps to pushes out of that range. I should mention there are 20 devoid creatures in the main board, so Tide Drifter affects tons of creatures in our deck. It justifies a 4 of. It is the only card in the deck I would absolutely never consider cutting a copy of after sideboard, and it is that good. Moving on to the mono-colored 3-drops, we have Vile Aggregate and Benthic Infiltrator, a full playset of each. Now, these cards both have ingest, which doesn't really matter too much, but they are our evasive creatures. Vile Aggregate has Trample, and Benthic Infiltrator can't be blocked at all, which means that once we've slammed Assault Formation on the field, these cards are huge threats. I will mention that Vile Aggregate and Benthic Infiltrator are also the cards that get us out of those games where we don't draw Assault Formation. We can gum up the field and then use these 2 to kind of push in damage. I've won tons of games just by playing Collected Company into a couple of Vile Aggregates and then making them huge and winning from there. So Vile Aggregate really helps with those games where we don't draw our namesake card. Benthic Infiltrator doesn't do as much in those games, but is an absolute house once we have the Assault Formation. They just can't do anything. It can't be blocked. So it pushes in so much damage. Moving on to the multicolor cards. Now, Herald of Kozilek is a 1-of in the deck, and honestly, Void Grafter is much, much better than it, so it's possible to just cut that 1-of Herald and play the 4th Void Grafter. In fact, I would suggest doing that, but I like running the 1-of Herald just to show you its capabilities. It reduces the cost of colorless spells that you cast by 1 generic mana, which means that if you're casting 2 3-drop Void creatures, you can actually play them both on turn 4. If you follow a turn 3 Herald of Kozilek with 2 turn 4 3-drops, you're in a super favorable position. It lets you flash in Void Grafter for 1 mana cheaper. It makes your Sentinels and your Tide Drifters 1 mana creatures It just does so much. The reason I only play one of it is because when you look at the sideboard in a couple seconds, you'll notice that we actually board into a lot of creatures that aren't colorless, which makes Herald of Kozilek a little less relevant. In fact, Herald of Kozilek is probably the first creature to get cut out of any of them here. It is a 4 toughness creature, just like most of the rest of the deck, so it's fitting our game plan perfectly, and it's just a nice solid creature. Now, Voidgrafter here is the real MVP. The flash on it is huge. When it comes into the battlefield, it gives another creature hexproof. This saves us from a lot of stuff right now. Declaration in Stone is such a huge card, and we can get blown out by Declaration so hard since we're gumming up the field, oftentimes with multiples of the same card. Voidgrafter saves us, and it lets us kind of hold up Collected Company and a creature at the same time. It also presents essentially a 4-power flash creature when Assault Formation is on the field. It is, aside from Tide Drifter, I would say the second best creature in the deck. Also, the fact that you can hit it off Collected Company lets you kind of do these weird combat trick turns where you've activated Collected Company and you get to fizzle a spell because you managed to Coco into a Voidgrafter. That's probably the best feeling you can possibly get in this deck. Very nice card. Probably needs the full playset, to be honest, so if you're really digging Voidgrafter like I am, I suggest cutting the Herald of Kozilek and playing the 4th Voidgrafter. Looking at the rest of the non-creature spells in the deck, we have 2 Anticipates and 4 Collected Companies. I've raved and raved and raved about Collected Companies so much. It's just a solid card, and it hits 20 creatures in our deck. Honestly, that count may be a little bit low, but to be fair, even if it hits 1 creature, it's okay. Disappointed at that, but when it hits 2 creatures, which is most of the time, it's absolutely fantastic. A third of our deck is creatures, and we're looking at a 10th of our deck whenever we cast the card. So if you do the math, it works out that we should hit 2 creatures most of the time. Anticipate, I only run 2 of them. I like the card because it helps us dig towards either an effective creature or our Assault Formation. Sorry, I'm slurring my words a little bit, but you can't play the full playset, and unfortunately Dig Through Time is not legal in Standard anymore, so we're kind of playing this card filter and instant here as a way to dig, maneuver through our deck very carefully, but in just a little, just a small quantity. We're only playing a pair of Anticipates instead of a full playset for the reasons listed before. Makes Collected Company a little bit worse if we just jam too many spells in our deck. And then finally, quickly talk about Gold Knight Castigator. I mentioned this is the only creature that's been added to the deck since Battle for Zendikar block, and it is obviously, if you look at it, it justifies its spot in this deck. Now, you can't afford to play 4 of these because the drawback is an actual drawback, and it's a little bit worse when you don't have Assault Formation, especially if your opponent's playing certain types of decks. But I like this as a one-of, kind of a surprise card out of nowhere. It can come down alongside Assault Formation and smash for 9 damage. 9 damage with haste and flying. Evasive damage. Crazy card. And even when you don't have Assault Formation, this is another one of those cards that can get you out of a real bind. Since we're playing very defensively, it's easy for us to toss a bunch of creatures out, wall up the field, and stop our opponent from getting through, and then kind of win in the air with a card like this. It leaves us vulnerable against a lot of cards like Draconic Roar, but, you know, that's why we're only playing 1. There is a second one in the sideboard for the matchups where it's actually really good. Moving on to said sideboard, I've picked a collection of cards that I really like. When making a sideboard for this card, I noticed that there were actually tons of options, and I kind of narrowed it down with Collected Company in mind and Assault Formation in mind. We wanted to maximize the power of Collected Company, and we want to maximize how effective our Assault Formation is. So we built the sideboard to complement our game plan while giving us a little bit more flexible options. So quickly, we'll talk about the 1 extra Radiant Flames for the matchups where it's really good. The 4th copy is just as good as the other 3. You can board out the other 3 copies very easily for more creatures if it's a bad matchup, and you can board in the 4th copy if it's a good matchup. Crater Elemental is really sweet, and I've yet to use the Formidable on it. For those of you who don't know, if you have 8 power on board, you can pay 3 mana, I believe 2 in a red, and Crater Elemental will become an 8/6 for the turn. That's not so much what we're concerned about. It is a 0/6, so it's actually the biggest 3-drop in the deck if we board into it. And it also has the ability for red. You can tap it and sack it to deal 4 to target creature. So it presents a removal spell at the same time presenting a huge body for our Assault Formation. Very nice card. I don't main board it because it is not a colorless creature. Doesn't really complement Tide Drifter too much, but like I said, you could probably main board these easily due to the fact that it is just a 6 toughness creature on its own. It is a 3-mana creature too. I know this is a little hard to see. The additional Gold Knight Castigator for either decks where we need more flying protection or decks where flying is going to win us the game. Speaking of which, that's where the Updraft Elemental, and I know that might this card might catch you off guard. It is the definition of like an okay draft card, so it's surprising to see it in the sideboard here. But when you have Assault Formation, this is essentially a 4/4 flyer for 3, and in case you're not aware, that's insane. When it's not, it's kind of weak, and it's pretty much the same as Benthic Infiltrator, but in matchups where, like I said, we're weak to flying, so in matchups where we need more flying protection, I don't mind taking out most of the Benthic Infiltrators and putting in these Updraft Elementals. They have the same body, the flying is close to unblockable, not exactly the same, and it fills the same kind of role while at the same time giving us protection from flying. Profaner of the Dead, for those of you who don't know, it says when he enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, you bounce all creatures your opponents control with toughness less than the sacrifice creature's toughness, I believe. Let's go and zoom in on this. Yeah, creatures your opponents control. Just wanted to verify that. So, Profaner of the Dead, where I really like him as a sideboard option is against token decks. A lot of these decks that play things like Secure the Wastes or Nissa, Gideon, so on and so forth, Profaner of the Dead is very good against them. It is a 4-mana creature, so we can't collect a company into it, so I'll often board the Gold Knight Castigator out in favor of the Profaner of the Dead. But it's a nice little option to offset Radiant Flames. And all of our creatures have high toughness, so we should be able to, at minimum, bounce anything with 3 toughness or less, which is pretty nice. Also leaves us with a 3/3 most of the time, which is okay as well. Mizzium Meddler is an absolutely incredible card that people probably forgot about as well and won't be playing around. It serves a similar purpose to Void Grafter, but it's a little bit different. In case you missed it, Mizzium Meddler is a 1/4 with Flash for 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, it has Spell Scout ability. You can redirect something that's targeting a creature or player and make it target Mizzium Meddler instead. Now, I do really, really like this mostly for decks that have Declaration in Stone. Like I said, Declaration can be a big problem for us, but Mizzium Meddler can come down and eat it, which can save us from a 2-for-1. We're still going to lose the Meddler, but it's better than losing, say, I don't know, 2 Vile Aggregates or something like that. There are some times where Meddler will come down and eat up an Aura or a pump spell like Titan Strength, or I've seen Griff's Boon played a little bit, things like that. Mostly you're going to use this to redirect damage spells or redirect removal spells in general, but it has these extra applications where it's just really, really nice. And just like Void Grafter, it is a 4 toughness flash creature, so when we have Assault Formation, it's insane. Oath of Nissa is a replacement for Anticipate, and the reason I have these in the sideboard is specifically for Dromoka's Command. As I'll mention later on, Dromoka's Command is probably the best card in Standard against this entire deck, and it's actually really incredibly good against this deck. Dromoka's Command can remove our Assault Formation since it's the only enchantment in the deck, so I like replacing Anticipates with Oath of Nissas as kind of this extra layer of protection. You can sacrifice an Oath instead of Assault Formation. For the same reason you can't play 4 Anticipates, I wouldn't suggest playing 4 Oath of Nissas. And the reason I play the Oaths in the sideboard instead of the main board is because they don't fetch enchantments. Last thing you want to do is play an Oath and then see like Assault Formation go to the bottom of the deck. So I think it's better served in the sideboard. It fits a very similar purpose to Anticipate, but it's a little bit worse in this deck, so I like switching them in and out when I need protection from Dromoka's Command. And then final card in the sideboard here is Jotty Offshoot as a 3 of. It gives us really good game against aggro decks, really good game against Burn, and things that are pecking in small amounts of damage, and it plays exceptionally well with the Assault Formation. It's an 0-3. This one does have Defender, so if we want to start attacking with it, we need the extra green mana every time we want to attack, but it's very synergistic with the deck while also giving us a good plan against burn spells and, in particular, games that can drain us out without attacking us. So Jotty Offshoot's pretty nice there as well. So this is going to take a few seconds to explain, but there are a lot of different ways to build Assault Formation decks, so I wanted to take a second and just kind of show you the alternatives here. There's kind of this nice white-black deck floating around too. Of course, you have to play green for the enchantment, but you get a lot of other options. Now, white has Wall of Resurgence, the absolutely insane, probably vintage playable Yoked Ox, Orator of Ojutai, Fortified Rampart, but you'll notice the reason I don't like to play white is because these creatures, for the most part, all have Defender, and they all have 0 power, so they actually legitimately don't do anything when you don't have Assault Formation, whereas the cards in the Temur version are able to still peck in small amounts of damage or go crazy with Vile Aggregate. These cards just straight up don't do anything except block, and that's a little bit worse. Although they do have generally higher toughness, and Orator of Ojutai is a really nice flyer if you have the Assault Formation online. But keep in mind, white does have options. Black, down here, you'll notice, has tons of options too. Vampire Envoy and Graveblade Marauder are really tedious creatures to play against, what with the Death Touch and the flying and the life gain and Marauder's stupid ability that does things, apparently. And just being 4 toughness creatures play really well. You also get Behind the Scenes, which gives all your creatures Skulk, and when all your creatures are either 0 or 1 power, it might as well say all your creatures are unblockable. If you're playing the black-white version, Splash and Green for Assault Formation, you also get access to that second ability, which is pretty nice, but is actually just legitimately worse than Assault Formation's activation, since you can activate it before attacks. You also get the criminally underrated Foul Renewal, which is actually a really good card. It's a removal spell and a pseudo-reanimation spell all in one. Well, not reanimation. It puts the creature back in your hand, but then it -X is a creature equal to the toughness of the creature you put back. So you can target something as simple as like an 0-4, get that back to your hand, and then -4/-4 another creature. It's a built-in 2-for-1. Very nice card. Sidisi is super sweet because it gets pumped off Assault Formation, and it also gives you the exploit that lets you tutor up a card in your deck, i.e. it lets you go search for Assault Formation. So when you have Sidisi in your deck, not only are you playing a really strong creature, essentially a 6/6 Death Touch for 5, but you also giving yourself additional copies of the enchantment that you usually need to win. And then I threw in Silent Skimmer here because I think that's probably just the dream. I don't really know what to say about Silent Skimmer other than 6 damage life swing per turn. The reason I don't play these versions is, like I said, the white version is it is super weak when you don't have Assault Formation, and the black version is a little more on the expensive side as far as mana cost goes, and makes me not want to play Collected Company. And decks that don't play Collected Company right now are not decks, in my opinion. No offense if you're not playing Collected Company. I also wanted to take a few seconds to show a couple cards that I've kind of looked at and didn't make the cut for the main board of the Temur version. Eldrazi Mimic is one where it was actually really good when Assault Formation is on the battlefield because you can toss down like a 1/4 and let Mimic copy it and then start bashing for 4. But the games where I didn't have Assault Formation, it was virtually irrelevant, and I would rather have a big defender than a 2/1 that I'm not going to block with. Hitchclaw Recluse was kind of my go-to card for flying until I came upon Updraft Elemental. As far as blocking goes, flying is a little bit better than reach, and they have the same body for the same mana cost, so Hitchclaw Recluse got the axe to Updraft Elemental. Guardians of Meltis is an 0/6 with Defender for 3. I don't really have a good reason not to play this. It is the only real benefit of playing it is that it's bigger than most of the other 3-drops, but I hate having the defenders in the main board, and I don't really see a reason to sideboard into this card. And in addition, I think Crater Elemental is a little bit of a better card to board into if that's what we're doing. So even though the toughness on it is really nice, I don't see it really doing too much for us. It is a colorless creature, but the fact that it has Defender is kind of what turned me off there. Processor Assault was a card I looked at. We can also consider like Roast and Tears of Valakut. But we have 8 Ingesters in our deck, so it's not too hard to get a card into exile on our opponent's side of the field. But Processor Assault is just essentially a dead card when you don't have a card exiled on your opponent's side of the field, and for that reason, it got the axe very, very quickly. Jace, I actually don't think Jace is as strong as people want to say. Jace is the best, like one of the best cards in Standard, and it's definitely really, really strong, but I think it's a little overrated. It's not really what we want for this deck, because it's super expensive and we want to kind of stick budgety. You can probably build the entire deck for less than a single Jace, and the card's actually just not that great. It does look nice because an 0-2 can attack as a 2-2 with Assault Formation, but you're never attacking with Jace. You're just using its loot ability, and the flip side of it doesn't do too much for the deck other than let us flashback Collected Companies, which granted is really good. One thing I will say on the positive side for Jace is that the loot ability gives us something to do with our extra Assault Formation, so maybe there's something there. If you have a playset of Jace and you want to play him, you can slot him into the deck probably in place of Kozilek Sentinel, and I think it would be just fine. Sigiled Starfish, probably the best card ever printed. 0-3 for 2, tap it to scry. I considered this card as an alternative to Anticipate because it lets us dig through the deck very, very slowly, and it also works nicely with Assault Formation. The reason I cut it is because I think it's just a little bit too low on the impact scale, even lower than something like Kozilek Sentinel. It's very slow, and when we don't have Assault Formation, it's embarrassing. Plus, the people at my store will laugh at me if I play Sigiled Starfish in a standard deck and take it seriously. Final 2 cards here, first one being Thing in the Ice. The spell count just is not high enough without conflicting with Collected Company. If you're the type of person who likes to play counter spells in your sideboard, Thing in the Ice might also be in your sideboard, and you can board them in as kind of a package deal, kind of a way to surprise your opponent by boarding out maybe your Assault Formations, and then your backup plan is to board in your Thing in the Ices and a couple counter spells and play more of a control game. Not a bad idea, but the way I've built the deck, Thing in the Ice just wasn't cutting it, unfortunately, because it is a really cool card. And then finally, Oblivion Sower is huge when there's Assault Formation and kind of hard to kill when there's not an Assault Formation. Plus, it usually gives you value, nets you 1 or 2 lands off of its Enter the Battlefield trigger, which is pretty sweet. But it is a 6-drop, and we curve out at 4, and I didn't really want to hurt the integrity of the deck by putting in a 6-drop, but I can see its spot in the deck just fine. I wouldn't knock it for somebody playing it. Final thing to talk about, our weaknesses and our strengths. Starting with the things that we're pretty good against. Transgress the Mind does not hit Assault Formation, which is awesome. Duress does, but let's not talk about Duress. It's not a real card. It doesn't exist. Forget about it. Transgress the Mind does, of course, hit a lot of things in our deck. It hits our 3-drops. It gives our opponent an idea of what we're doing before we can do it. But it doesn't hit the key card that we need, which is a problem with decks that rely on a single card. Fiery Impulse and Ultimate Price are here to kind of show the resilience we have to a lot of the removal that's being played. Ultimate Price does not hit. Well, it has a single target in our main board, which is Gold Knight Castigator. It doesn't hit Devoid cards. And the nice thing about Ultimate Price is after playing the first game, your opponent's very likely to board out all their Ultimate Prices, and we're very likely to board into a lot of creatures that will actually die to it, so there's a very nice trade-off. Anything that deals less than 4 damage isn't going to kill our creatures. Yes, Roast is a pain in the butt, but things like Fiery Impulse, Draconic Roar, they're just not going to do it. We're just going to sit there with our 4 toughness creatures and kind of laugh them off. And if your opponent wants to use multiple burn spells, multiple removal spells to kill a single creature, I think that's fine. It just pushes your opponent back on the card advantage scale and pushes us ahead. We can easily replace another creature if our opponent wants to spend 2 removal spells on them. One thing to point out is that Pyromancer's Goggle is a thing in Standard right now, which makes their burn spells essentially duplicates. But that can definitely get us, but it takes a while for them to get going, so hopefully you can push in a win before that happens. We are good, like I said, against aggro and kind of these early mid-rangey decks like Bant Company that play smaller creatures. Of course, Bant Company is just very, very good, but we can usually flood the board with enough creatures to block and hopefully trade off and deal with a lot of their threats. Our creatures' toughness is generally bigger than most of the creatures that these decks can present, and that's very nice to have in your main board. And then finally, maybe Chandra is a bad example because there are games where you're not going to have Tide Drifter and Assault Formation, and Chandra can come down in -4 to wipe most of our creatures. But in general, what I meant by putting Chandra under strength here is that we're resilient to board wipes. Essentially, Kozilek's Return and our own Radiant Flames, as well as opponents' Radiant Flames. And like I said, we can push out of the range of Chandra, Kozilek's Return, and Languish, which is a really nice game to have in our main board. So we're pretty good against board wipes. And by board wipes, I mean sweepers, not planar outburst or things like that. And then what are we weak against? Of course, we're weak to a lot of things. I'm not saying the deck's perfect. It is a little cute. I wouldn't say it's tier 1 either, but Nahiri and Dromoka's Command kind of show our vulnerability to enchantment removal. Enchantment removal will get us. Thankfully, we're running 4 copies, and there are times where you can just replace your Assault Formation, or you might already have multiples up, and we kind of get to blank the ability, or blank the effectiveness of their removal. Dromoka's Command, like I said, is probably the best card against us. Not only does it have the fight ability, which is just inherently good on a 2-mana card, and not only does it have that enchantment removal as well, but it also has that part that people seem to forget about where it prevents the damage from a sorcery or an instant for the turn, and we are running Radiant Flames. So these green-white human decks, or these Bant decks that are playing Dromoka's Command in the main board, we're going to need to be wary of it. Play around Dromoka's Command. Big flyers, we have trouble dealing with them. Like I said, Sidisi's Faithful is kind of our catch-all to that, and we have a couple options out of the sideboard, but you do need to be wary. Don't let your opponent flip an Ormondal on you without an answer to it. You will likely lose that game. Den Protector is a single card that was worth noting. All of our creatures are super, super low power, and Assault Formation doesn't actually boost our power. It just like theoretically makes our power different. So Den Protector can push past us quite easily. Colostria Healer is here to represent the decks that don't really have to attack us to win. There are some of these dirtily decks that can just drain out over the span of a game. Cards that or decks that play like Zulport Cutthroat as their win condition, or Colostria Healer, things like that that drain over time can really get us if we're struggling to find a way to win on our side of the battlefield. And then cards with the number 5 written on them are pretty good against us. Roast being kind of the premier removal spell to deal with us. Thankfully, people don't play playsets of Roast very much, and a lot of people just leave it in the sideboard, so we have very good early game against most people. Alright, so that's all I have to say. I will leave you with kind of the busted draw here. I like to just kind of send off the deck with an idea of how crazy it can get. Something really absurd it can do. You can actually win on turn 4 with this deck. How likely is it? Well, not very likely, but it is possible. If you go turn 1 Faithful, turn 2 Tide Drifter, turn 3 Assault Formation and attack, that's 9 damage. And then on the following turn, if you use the pump ability on Assault Formation and attack again, that's 11 damage. Boom, 20 damage on turn 4. And even if your opponent does present blockers, they're going to have to chump. So that's the crazy nut draw here. And damn, is that a good draw. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. Like I said, there are a lot of different ways to build Assault Formation, and I think the card is absolutely insanely fun to play with, so I recommend playing the Temur version and then adjusting it yourself. I would like to know what kind of builds you've had with Assault Formation, and I would actually like you, if you've noticed any cards that work really well with the enchantment that I didn't mention, please leave a comment and let me know, because I'm super open to playing with this card in different ways until it rotates out later this year. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll be putting up more videos over time. And again, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.